Main, and in the this is the Westland, this is the Cactus Land. Hello, hello. These are the system of different poetry, and
Yes, sir.
so
Sir, you
ever.
said
Sir,
that, excuse me, sir. Sir, you said that
Uh,
Sydney is the city of consciously concerned, and Melbourne.
uh, Melbourne and Sydney. These are two cities of
Yes, sir.
Australia,
Yeah, sir. Melbourne
and these
indicates.
two Melbourne is consciously concerned. It is
No,
consciously conscience ridden.
acha.
Consciously conscience ridden. Melbourne. And that Sydney is heartless, heartful, or
sir, how are
hearty and
these two
heartless.
cities concerned with the style of poetry in Australia, sir? I'm not getting the link
Because
of these two cities.
these two cities, because these two cities people, they started leading different types of a cultural life, and their life was not just like bush culture. That life was not even if the life of the people living in a wild land, forest land, and this is it. And so city has brought a great change. City life, suppose city of our Delhi, Bangalore, that Calcutta, and these are the metropolitan cities. The people who lead their life in such a style that is quite different from the life of the rural people. Two World War, even if 1914, 1999, First World War and Second World War, they brought the radical change in the field of economic and socio-cultural life, because that has brought some crisis of economics, the crisis of culture, and all these. In 1946, uh, there it means different types of immigrants or white settlers. They started also coming to this land, because it was a massively migration started in the year 1946. The massive migration started from earlier southern Europe to Australia. This massive migration brought a radical change in Australian socio-cultural and economic forum. Can you understand
Sir,
me?
this migration
So,
started in 1946 in Australia, sir.
40,
Sorry to interrupt, sir.
yes, yes. In Australia, that was the massive migration. Massively people came from this land, and massively they started giving impact to the cultural life, and they started city life, also village life, rural life, and so the World War, these two World Wars, and also the massive migration from different lands, that created some sort of a cultural conflict, and that conflict made the system of life very hacknoid. As a result of the poetry, since it is a criticism of life, so it reflected the people of the land and the landscape. The diffusion of a nation and land remain major concern for the poetry. The diffusion of a nation, the feeling of a nation, while the immigrants come to this soil, they started leading their life in such a way that may not be correlated to the life of Australian people. There was a class of culture, CLAC, class means conflict of culture. So, here, as a result of poetry takes another mode. There was a cultural conflict between Aborigines and white settlers from Europe and other immigrants. There was a class of
Sir, this
culture between the
cultural,
native conflict,
uh,
cultural conflict, because
this
of
this was
the
between the
massive.
people, between the natives of Australia and the white people, Englishmen.
Yes, European people, Englishmen like German, French, European literature, European people,
Okay. Okay.
and
Thank you, sir.
the writers are more affected to the class of culture, as they were trying to give the pen portrait of making the people about the conscious of their own culture. So this is all about. You listen to me. Just after a discussion, I will give you dictation.
Sir, sir, are
Yes.
you trying to say that you said that poetry has two cultures, that bush culture and city culture. So city culture is
Yes,
mostly affected by the immigrants, which they actually came to this land,
immigrants,
right?
yes,
Yes.
yes.
And bush
that
culture is
bush
the native people who are very related to nature, right?
nature related to
Okay.
wild forest, jungles, and also their own native place about legends, about their oral tradition. They the traditional aborigines, in the
Yes.
traditional native. Can you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Now I
You
understood.
see,
Thank you.
since the poetry is the criticism of life, adding poetic beauty and poetic truth in the words of Matthew Arnold, the great English critic. Matthew Arnold is a great English critic who says that poetry is nothing but a criticism of life. Suppose the city of London in West End, that was London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is the civilization of Europe. The modern civilization is crumbling down because of the people are just like a hollow men. He has written it. This is a wasteland, cactus land, unproductive land, barren land, barren of the religion, barren of the culture, barren of the humanity. Everything is completely sterile. So that Eliot has written that this is London Bridge is falling down, falling down. And the tradition of Australian modern poetry is also reflected by T.S. Eliot and Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold is the 19th century English critic and writer. So in his Dover Beach, he has told that the criticism of life. Life means socio-economic, cultural life of Australia must be criticized by a poet. That is the true system of poetry. But Eliot said that thought and feeling must be balanced, just like two factors. Sulfur reacts with oxygen in the presence of ammonium. So that creates sulfur dioxide. Just like poet's mind is a catalyst. Catalyst means which remains unaffected but accelerates the motion of the chemical chain. So this is all about the poetry. The scholarly people, professors of Sydney University also began to form distinguished chairs in the philosophy, religion, and economics, and in their poetry. The poetry was supposed to be very much affected. Therefore, the learned professors from Sydney University and Melbourne University, they thought that there should be some sort of a chair. The chairs must be what? That philosophy, poetry, German, French, classic literature. These chairs were opened. Chairs means the prestigious constituents for discussion and that. Then come Vernon, 1870 to 1932, was a 19th century poet. That Baudelaire, Melbourne, symbolically they wanted to give their poetic spontaneity on their own method. So German critic, French critic, and the symbolic writer Baudelaire and other poets, they have started giving concern to the migration and Australian sort of poetry. The native singer, the example of a tree, all these are about the affected poems. The poem of overall, the orange tree is another, and speak about the vibrant spring moment of the nature. The poetry of nation, Australia, and other frames, they started writing also poetry. Then we come to that the poets like Johann Shaw Nelson, Kenneth Slessor, R.D. Fitzgerald, Judith Wright, who was last time I was taking Judith Wright is a women poet and a critic who speaks more about it. She was a professor of Sydney University, and she herself has presented her important poem Legend. That legend tells about Judith Wright's criticism, the way of poetry. Then come also David Campbell, James Maclay, Eddie Hope, Rosemary Dawson, and also Kathy Walker, and Arne Melly, Anya Walker, John Farwell, and all these are Australian poets. Baudelaire, Blake, Robert Burns. They were very much important one. William Blake, you know English poetry. William Blake has written about different types of poetry, about mysticism, miracles of life. Also, it gave an impact to also the poetry of Australia. Baudelaire was a symbolist, and he wanted to give some sort of a poem, poetic impact. That Robert Burns was another English poet whose influence to Australian for modern poetry, the mysticism, William Blake's symbolism, Mallarmé's and Baudelaire's romanticism, and Wordsworth's Keats' romantic spontaneity influence Australian poetry. Then you come to the feeling of the nation of Australia symbolically represents obsessivism, search for identity, search for knowledge, search for different types of own belonging. That southern country is one of the typical poems which deals about Australian way of life. The cultural life of the two cities, the cultural life of the bush culture, and all the that is a great class of poetry, means class of culture. So poetic field is absolutely changed just for the impact. Let me a little bit, my dear, a pause. Just for a break of the poetry, that was only because of the impact of city culture, the impact of bush culture. All these two impacts, they started clashing each other and giving impact to the poetic field. So then Adi Frenja, another poetry. So poetry, since is a criticism of life, it gives the reflection of the truth and poetic beauty. What is poetic beauty? Adding the real truth of the original people, those who are living in the soil of Australia. Then finally, Slasher is another Australian typical poet whose poetry is romantically philosophical and represent about mysticism and different types of uh, angles of life. That Eliot's Wasteland, Four Quartets, Hollow Men, all these classic poetry, they started to give impact on the poetry of Australia because the white settler from Europe, especially from Britain, they started coming here and also giving impact to the field of Australian poetry. So Judith Wright is another women poet. Judith Wright is another women poet who wrote The Voice of Australia in her bulletin. She was a learned professor of that Melbourne University, and her bulletin is also the reflection of poetic style and the different types of system of the poetry, the technique of the poetry. All these were also published in the bulletin, and her two important poems that are moving image, women to men. These are two functions of the poetry. These are two masterpieces of Joditi Wright that reflect Australian culture and the class of culture, the massive migrations system, how it impacted to the natural life of Australia. And another poem that Judith Wright is a legend that tells the story of a blacksmith of a boy. The story of a blacksmith boy, how the boy was about to leading his precarious life. I will discuss it by text also just after that. The poem Bullock Cat and that uh, another poem of David Campbell that James and Eddie Hope. These are the very important poets of Australian poetic field. Under that, Aldery Bain and other kinds of poets were also found. But that Eddie Hope was a very important poet whose poetry is based upon that New South Pole and about to he was born in a coma and who started language literature reading in that Sydney and Oxford University, and she was working as a professor of Melbourne University, and her trend of poetry is very much influential and that given the impact of Australian culture. Then comes women's voice, women writing, that is Rosemary Dobson, who has written the poetry feministic flame that sisters spots and that gives about the feministic voice, and that voice was very much important and that immortalized the Australian culture. Then come Aboriginal voice. Aboriginal voice means the native people of Australia. They started giving their voice, and city culture voice means these two cities like Melbourne and also Sydney, the people those who were living, these was a class of two cultures which gave an important impact to the form of the modern poetry of Australia. So then come Katha Walker. Katha Walker is another, and also Aboriginal birth. Katha Walker is a poet of Aboriginal birth. Also, she always represents the civilization of Australia, and forcefully that she is telling, I am an international, never mind place, I am for humanity, all one race. So this Katha worker, who is a famous Australian poet, always feels herself very much universal because she does not have any racial discrimination or a feeling of any sorts of culture. That's why she expressed in her poetry that I am an international, never mind place. I am for humanity, for all one race. That means her poetry is very important. I am international, never mind place. I have no any particular place that I can highlight it, that either Australia or any other place of the world. I am for humanity. I speak all my voice only for the existence of humanity. All one race, not different races. There was no discrimination of race, caste, creed, and culture because of her poetry is based upon universality. She feels very much wide scope of her field only because of a familiarity, and that was not any sorts of a discrimination of the culture. Then we are going is another her poem that expresses the agony, disposition, the agony and struggle for the existence of Australian people, how they were culturally displaced, they were culturally tortured and tormented economically. Also, they were displaced, and the different types of socio-cultural economic life that started giving all sorts of impact to the soil of Australian poetry. So, Australian poetry is overall very radically changed. And then we come to some sort of a text of Australian poem. Then I will give dictation and question answer. Let us come to some text of the Australian poetry. Hello, hello, my dear student. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, sir, you are
Yes, sir, you are
audible.
audible, sir.
Okay, you see, I am citing the poetry of Judith Wright, legend. The text I am discussing. Text Judith Wright. The blacksmith boy went out with a trifle and a black dog running behind. Cobwebs snatched his feet, rivers hindered him. Thorn branches cut his eyes of the blind, and I can break branches, I can swim river, I can stare, and a spider I meet, said the dog to his rifle. Means this is these are the lines of Judith Wright. Judith Wright is a women poet of Australia, and she gives all sorts of Australian landscape culture. So this is also a blacksmith boy from dawn to dusk. He is going on working in the working field only because to earn some wages for her existence of his family. So this is all about the different troubles and cultures and different types of very difficult life, economically suffering a lot, just like Thomas Hardy, just like that Charles Dickens novels, Hard Times, and Oliver Twist was this all about Judith Legend's poetry. Again, she is giving very beautiful simile of her poem, like a barrel of a gun, like an old black hat, like a black dog hungry to follow me, then pigeons Makepeace and his wife, that book and everything else. When he came to end of the day, sun began falling. Of that night ready to swallow him. Means this is all about the text of this particular blacksmith boy. So Judith Well, this is the structure of the poetry that Judith Well is very much particular to the technique of the poem. The poem must be alliterative. The poem must have some image, some sort of symbol, and all sorts of poetic field. So Judith Wells' poem is very excellent and classical for the Australian poet. Again, another poem of South Country of Kenneth Slasher. I am discussing that after the whole day, as if an urgent tree and dawn that doubts the quarreling plots of the pain. And this is also the reflection of Australian socio-cultural life. Then you come to the orange tree. Orange tree is another poem of John Straw Nelson. So I will give a dictation about some sort of poets and poetry. Don't be worried. A young girl stood beside me. I saw her eyes could see a light said that of the sky lives somewhere orange tree. Means this is the sorrows and suffering of a helpless girl who is standing near the poet, and her eyes were reflecting some sort of anger, some sort of oppression, depression, some sort of internal voice, everything else her eyes were speaking. Therefore, that Nelson John speaks a lot about the sorrows and the suffering. Then we shall go to the another poem of another poet. Lastly, that let us come to Australian Dream. Australian Dream. This poem and Cock Crow. Cock Crow. We are going. All these are poems of Australia. We are going. Just I am discussing 2 to 3 lines. They come into little town. A semi-naked band settled to silent. All silent remained their tribe, and all they crying. Wanting of myself alone. This is the cock crow. Wanting of myself alone between the lit house and the town, I look the road, I look the bridge, turned back, walked while they come. So these are the poems that I have already discussed, and next you come to some sort of some sort of also the trends of the poetry. My dear students, are you very much audible to myself, and can you say
Yes, sir.
anything else? You write something else about the modern poetry, then I will discuss it.
Sir,
You
now we
write.
have to write.
Yes, you write.
Okay, sir.
There is a sea of a change in Australian poetic field in between 1886, 1886 and 1904.
Sir, can you please
Australian
go a little bit slowly, sir? And what is the year of sir? You said that Australian poetic field in
1800, 1886, 1886 and 1904. Australian culture was divided into two schools. Number one, bush culture and city culture. Bush culture and city culture. That may be termed as rural and urban culture. Rural and urban culture. One is rural landscape, other is urban culture. The characters of two principal cities. The
sir
characters of
rural
two
culture.
principal
Excuse me, sir. Sir,
and
the previous line rural culture and
urban, urban culture, city culture. The characters of two principal cities, Sydney, Melbourne. The characters of two principal cities, Sydney and Melbourne. One is Sydney, you write it, the heartless. Another is consciously conscience ridden. Another is consciously conscience ridden. You must understand. Heartless. What does it mean? The particular person must be a cruel man, but in spite of that cruelty, he must have some sympathy in the heart of heart. This is a heartless, or heartful. That means a social gunda. Suppose is a cruel person and may be very much a drunkard or a characterless, but he must have a grain of sympathy in his heart. This is heartless. And another, that is consciously conscience ridden. Consciously conscience ridden means also conscience ridden means suppose the fight between thought and feeling, good and bad. The fight between good and bad in the mind. When we go to do some work, we must feel that whether it is good or whether it is bad. This is a class. This is a debate in the mind. This is called consciously conscience-ridden poetry. These two cities were were affected by all these. Again, you write these two cities changed the face of Australian poetry. But actually, these two cities changed the face of Australian poetry and the face of Australian literature as a whole, that was radically changed only for these two schools of poetry. What were two schools of poetry? The school of poetry about city culture, another the school of poetry is about village culture, that forest landscape, village people, poor boy, poor persons, oppressed, depressed, everything else in the society. This is all about that. Again, you write
Sir, can you please
two
repeat that line? These two cities changed the face of Australian poetry then?
Australian poetry,
जी.
both culturally and socially, both culturally and socially. Then come to two world war. Two world war. These two world wars means First World War, Second World War. That was in 1914. It ended 99 and 39 to 45. All these periods were going under the 20th century second quarter. 20th century second quarter, and these two significant wars also changed the entire culture of the world in general, and the culture of Australia in particular. So these two world wars brought a devastating change in the field of Australian poetry. Have you written it? These two world wars have brought a significant change in the field of Australian poetry. Just next paragraph you see. In 1946, the 46, the massive migration, the massive migration
Sir, are these the important
brought
questions, sir?
in 1946, the massive migration from European countries to the land of Australia brought a radical change in the field of Australian poetry. In 1946, there was a massive migration. Listen to me just a little bit. There was a massive migration from European countries like Britain, German, France, and other countries. They started different types of people coming to the land of Australia. The white settlers means European people, that British people, colonization, the colonial regime that came to the soil of India. As a result of their culture was being very much so forcibly taken away. Whose culture means the culture of Australian natives were not even given respect by them because they were respecting their own culture. The immigrants, those who came from different lands, they started giving their importance to their own culture, not paying any sort of respect to their culture. Their culture. Their culture. Uh, this is not, listen to me. Now, in 1946, have you read it? And then
Oh,
come
sir,
Australia.
sir,
Aust-
in 1946, the massive migration from European country to the land of Australia. Then you said something which I didn't wrote. Can you please
oh,
repeat?
land of Australia brought a radical change in the field of Australian poetry. In the field of Australian poetry. Consequent upon this, the life of the natives became hackneyed and gaudy. Hakneyed, hackneyed
Sir,
and gaudy.
please repeat that line again, please.
Consequent upon this massive migration, the life became difficult, difficult in socio-economic cultural field of Australia. The life became difficult in socio-economic and cultural field of Australia. Next, just you stop a little bit, I will give understanding. Whenever there was a migration, a lot of immigrants from different countries they started coming to soil of Australia. As a result of, they were very much arrogant and obstinate to their own culture. They did not have any respect to the natives of Australia. As a result of, there was a clash between two cultures. The immigrant culture means the culture of that. Just after the two cities culture, that Melbourne, Sydney, the people living in that place, the native Australian in the wild forest. There was the fiction of the culture. And all these factors brought a radical change in the field of Australian poetry. Then you write diffusion of nation and land, the diffusion of nation and land remains major concern. The diffusion of nation and land remains major concern for Australian poetry so far. The diffusion of nation and land remains major concern for Australian poetry so far. There was a cultural conflict between Aborigine, Aborigines means the native, and the white settlers from Europe and other nations. There was a cultural conflict between the natives and the white settlers from European and other nations. The writers are the writers of the country are more affected are more affected either in the field of poetry or in the field of any other literary forum, either in the field of poetry or any other literary forum,
Sir, please repeat that line. The writers of the country are more effective.
are more affected either in the field of poetry or in the field of any other literary form, novel, drama, prose, poetry, any other literary form. Again, write it. Since poetry is the criticism of life, since poetry is the criticism of life, adding poetic beauty and poetic truth, adding poetic beauty and poetic truth in the words
Sir,
of Matthew
since
Arnold.
sir, since poetry is criticism of life, then
Life, adding, adding, adding means adjusting, adding poetic beauty and poetic truth, poetic beauty and poetic truth in the words of Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold is a English critic, and that Judith Wright also the Australian critic. Australian critic always follow the principle of Matthew Arnold because since Judith Wright was a native born, but Arnold was an English poet, but Judith Wright respected to the English poetry and wrote poetry in her own system. Then you write the scholarly professors of Sydney University, the scholarly professors from Sydney University began to form distinguished chairs in the branches of philosophy, classic, French, German, English.
sir, please repeat that line. The scholarly professor from Sydney University began to form.
Form distinguished chairs means prestigious concern, prestigious constituents, prestigious that is also a kind of organization, that is chair in philosophy, classic, French, German, and English. You stop a little bit and understand. These chairs were opened by the learned professor of Sydney University and Melbourne University for development of the poetic field, for development of the Australian poetry. They started discussing with organization. They cordially invited different poets from different lands. They wanted to discuss the philosophy. They wanted to discuss the German literature, that French literature, and inviting different friends from various nations to their organization, delivering speeches and the formation of the poetry, philosophy, and the language and literature. These were the chairs opened for only for the discussion. Let us you come to another form. Write it. Brennan, 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 whose life duration 1870 to 1932. From 1870 to 1932, his birth and death. Brennan was a 19th century Australian poet. Was a 19th century Australian poet. He was strongly he was strongly influenced by Baudelaire, Malayalam, Baudelaire, 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 a French poet, Malayalam, Malayalam are two leading poets of two cultures, added their poetic influence, added their poetic influence to modern Australian poets. Stop. Brennan, this poet, is known as the this poet this poet is known as the father of Australian poet. Father of Australian poet.
Sir, this poet that indicates who actually?
This poet means that Brennan. This poet,
Branham.
Brennan.
Okay. So I
Brennan.
have put this poet in the bracket Branham, right?
Brennan is the father of Australian modern poetry. Next, let us discuss two lines of his poetry. You write it that the native singer, the orange tree. These are two poems. The native singer, the orange tree. These two poems vibrantly speak about Australian landscape. Vibrantly speak about Australian landscape. Australian landscape. And another aspect of these two poems, another aspect of these two poems speak a lot, speak a lot about 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 the urban culture, the urban culture, the urban culture. Baudelaire, 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 Blake, William Blake, 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 Robert Burn, Robert, Robert Burn, B. Warren, influence, influence to the technique and the structure of the Australian poetry. Technique and structure of the Australian poetry. Further, this Australian poetry of 20th century was strongly affected by
Sir, can you please repeat that line? This Australian poetry?
was strongly affected by some English romantic poets, some English romantic poets like Wordsworth and Keats, like William Wordsworth and John Keats, like William Wordsworth and John Keats. John Keats. You stop a little bit. I am giving detailed description how they reflect.
Sir,
Wordsworth's
in
poem
John, Sir, William
John Keats,
Wordsworth, John Smith.
Wordsworth and John Keats, 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 John Keats, sensuous poet. You stop a little bit. I am discussing how they give greater impact to the field of Australian poet. So Keats's poem, I am citing example. John Keats, one of the lines that Keats is a sensuous poet. Sensuous poet means five sensitive organs are appealed by Keats. For example, sense of sight, sense of sound, sense of touch, sense of taste. All these are five organs that every human being they wear. Music when soft voices dry vibrate in memory, louder when sweet violet thicken, lived within the sense thy quicken. Rose leaves when rose leaves are dead, are hewed from the beloved's bed. Love itself slumber on. Means I love you where love is there. Means this is Keats' poetry. Keats writes about different kinds of words, Keats poet. And Shelley also writes, I faint, I fell, I die, I fall upon the thorns of life and I bleed. Life thorn means life is full of thorns. I fall upon the thorns of life and I bleed. These are the romantic poets. They appeal the nature. Wordsworth always appeals to the nature and give the philosophy that is the pantheistic philosophy, the philosophy of the identity search for God through nature. All the romantic poets like Shelley, Byron, Keats, even if he Coleridge, also rhyme of the ancient America, to whom they were appealing to the five sensitive organs in search of a real humanity in the lap of nature. Then you write, the nation of Australia, the nation of Australia symbolically represents symbolically represents obsession, search for identity, search for knowledge about unknown land, about unknown land, and the real law of the land, and the real law of the land of Australia, of Australia, real law of the land of Australia. South Country is another typical poem. South Country, invite comma. South Country is another typical poem which deals with Australian landscape. Australian landscape. Stop. The poem is mostly visible. The poem is mostly visible for its for its fusion of mood and style. Fusion of mood and style. Fusion. Fusion. Mood and style. The poem is romantically fabulous. Fabulous. Fabulous means luxuriant. Fabulous and
Sir, please repeat that line. The poem is romantic.
romantically fabulous and visibly full of natural pictures and visibly full of natural pictures like Wordsworth, Keats's poetry. Wordsworth and Keats's poetry. These poems, these poem South Country. This poem South Country is full of pictures of nature or natural paraphernalias. Natural paraphernalias. Paraphernalia. Paraphernalia means samagri in India. Natural paraphernalias. You stop a little bit and understand how it is. Wordsworth, Daffodils poem you have read it. Wordsworth, Solitary Reaper you have read it. Kids says Ode you might have read it. Ode to Wind, Ode to Nightingale, and all these are odes. That these are the romantic poets. Shelley's poem Ode to Wind that tells about that I faint, I fell, I die, and all these romantic poets they appeal to the philosophy of life through nature. They see the life in the picture of nature. It is a storehouse to them. They search the identity of a humanity through nature. Wordsworth's pantheistic philosophy, Shelley's future, Keats's present and past. All these give the picture of that romantic poetry. Then you come to another paragraph. R.D. Fitzgerald. R.D. Fitzgerald is another Australian leading poet. Another Australian leading poet of Australian leading poet poet of the people, poet of the people. Sydney is a place, is a city. Bulletin, Sydney Bulletin, that is written by also Judith Wright, who is a critic. She is also a professor of at Sydney University. Sydney Bulletin speaks a lot about R. D. Fitzgerald's poetic genius in the field of modern Australia. Modern Australia. Another paragraph you write, finally, Slessor, Slessor is another Australian typical poet, is another Australian typical poet whose poetry is romantically philosophical, romantically philosophical,
Sir, can you please repeat that? Why is another Australian typical poet? Then,
typical poet whose poetry is romantically philosophical, romantically philosophical, representing mystery and miracle of life, representing mystery and miracles of life. To stop a little bit, I am giving understanding that Slasher's poetry is full of nature, just like Wordsworth, Shelley, Byron, Keats of the British poet. And natural landscape are the real subject matter of Slasher's poetry. Through nature, also, the poet is going to find out the identity of Australia. So, since poetry is a criticism of life, that is a common term which has been casted by that romantic poet Matthew Arnold, that it gives the real picture of the real people of Australia. So, this is all about that. Then you write Eliot's Wasteland, Eliot, 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 T.S. Eliot, Eliot's Wasteland, WST. This is very classical poem. Wasteland, comma, four quartets, FOUR, QUARTTES, four quartet, and Hollowman, Hollowman, influence Slasher's, Slasher's poetry, Slasher's poetry. So we will discuss the Slasher's poetry just after the end of the class. Just at the end of the class, you see, you stop a little bit. I am just giving you understanding. Eliot's Wasteland. Wasteland means that is a symbolic poem. Wasteland, which is the wasteland is a land that is a barren land. This is wasteland. This is barren land because it is sterile land. The people of this land do not have a fertility or any sorts of vitality to give rebirth, to give birth. So this is wasteland. Means the entire European civilization is full of barrenness, wasteland. And hollow man. We are the modern men. We do not have any sorts of humanity, fellow feeling, religion, uh, obedience to the God, obedience to the superiors. So man becomes a hollow, just like a scarecrow in the orchard, in the garden. And this is wasteland, this is cactus land. Cactus is also herb which does not have any productivity. And this is Ostland. Four Quartets is another philosophical poem of W.H. sorry, Eliot. This poem gives the four quartets, means four elements of the body, that is the fire, earth, air, water. And these are four elements vitally reflect to our physical body as well as mental body. So it relates to a great physical and philosophical poem. So these poems greatly reflect to Slasher's poetry. So Slasher poetry is full of philosophy of life. Then you write Judith Wright. Judith Wright, Judith. Judith Wright, comma, Australian leading critic, Australian leading critic, published her bulletin, published her bulletin, which gives which gives ample characteristic of Australian modern poet, which gives ample characteristic feature of Australian modern poet. Judith Wright, the Australian leading poet, leading critic, published her bulletin that gives the ample characteristic of Australian modern poetry. Then write her poem, her moving image, her moving image. This is a poem. Her moving image, 1946, bracketed it poem. Her moving image, 1946. Women to men, women to men, men, WMN, women to men, 1949. These two poems, these two poems are two masterpieces of Judith Wright. Are two masterpieces of Judith Wright. Stop. These two poems explore the landscape and the real picture, the real picture.
Sir, two masterpieces of Judith Wright. Then what you said? Can you please repeat that line?
These two poems of Judith Wright means her moving image, women to men. They explore landscape and the real picture of Australian, 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 Australian inheritance. Inheritance. Inheritance means succession. Australian inheritance. Her description in the poetry, her description in the poetry gives a pen portrait, gives a pen portrait, Penportrait, pen portrait, pen picture means written word. Pen picture, pen of portrait of sorrows and the suffering of the natives Australian, of native Australian, and and supremacy or hegemony, or the hegemony of white settlers, or the hegemony of white settlers, or a supremacy of white settlers. Then another paragraph you write, another poem, that is legend. Legend. I will discuss the text next, just after that. Legend, Legend, legend tells the story of a blacksmith boy. A blacksmith boy tells the story of a blacksmith boy about his physical hardship.
Sir,
And
can you please repeat that line? The legend tells the story of a blacksmith boy. After that, what you said, sir?
uh, tells the story of a blacksmith. What tells the story of a blacksmith boy tells the story of the physical hardship, and quest for quest for his identity, quest for his identity that symbolically represents that symbolically represents the real identity of modern Australia, of modern Australia. This is a poem about low birth, not high birth,
Sir, that
very low
symbolic,
birth.
sir, that symbolic real identity of modern Australia. That actually that line I didn't get that. Can you please repeat that line and after that also please tell.
That represents the real identity of Australia, Australia.
Sir, after that,
So after that, just you stop a little bit. I am discussing the blacksmith boy from dawn to dusk. That blacksmith boy from dawn to dusk. This is subject matter of the poem. From dawn to dusk, goes to his field, working field, labors hard, and did very much. He went through the difficult financial crisis. And when he returned from the field of work, there is also the hackneyed life of the family. The family is not peaceful one because economically they were going through the crisis. The father, mother, parents, sister, brother, and all these were the kith and kins that of a boy, and did not have any peace. In spite of his hard work in the field or hardship, he does not have any peace. So he thinks what to do and what to undo. And he must have to search his own identity. That is the real identity of Australian people. Right, another. The poem Bullock, Bullocky, 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 Bullock. This is the adjective Bullocky, Bolad Gadi, Bullocky depicts back-breaking, back-breaking, back-breaking life of the early settlers, means natives. The back-breaking means their traditional culture was broken down by the white settler on the soil of India, sorry, soil of Australia. Back-breaking of early settlers and hard-working toils, 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 hard-working toils in the field of existence, in the field of existence, field of existence. Then you write David Campbell is another Australian modern poet. David Campbell, David Campbell, David Campbell, Pell, 1915 to 79, range of her birth and death. Birth death. David Campbell poem The Miracle of Million Hill. The Miracle of the Miracle, Miracle, the miracle of a million hill, Hill, hill. Another poem, Devil Rock, Devil, Devil Rock, Curiosity, are two masterpieces of Australian modern poetry that reflects about the cultural class in the land of Australia, in the land of Australia. Again, you write James McClay, James McClay, James McClay, James McClay, 1917 to 76, 76, early 20th century, late 20th century, 17 to 76. Hello, my dear. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Sir, can you please repeat the year?
Year 1917 to 76, 17 to 76.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Ah, her poem you
Excuse me,
write it.
sir.
Sir,
Before that, what you said now for 3 to 4 minutes, actually, my signal was lost. I couldn't able to hear that. I actually missed that one. At the end, can you please tell me after that?
what? I cannot follow you. What is it
Actually,
called?
sir, yes, actually, that blacksmith story you was narrating, na, sir. At that point,
Uh,
after that, what you said, I didn't
we
able
will
to
come
see.
later. Yes, you
Yes,
will come later just after completion. You write.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure. Thank you, sir.
Uh, um, uh, Under Aldebaran, this is the poem. Under, these are the difficult words that Australian people use. It is very indecent to write, indecent to tell, to pronounce it, even if because the Australian people so name their culture, their aspects, everything is something different. You write under Aldebaran, 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 under Aldebaran, 1946, 1946, birth, her poem you see, ceremony, vision of a ceremony, vision of a ceremony, arises the question of identity, arises the question of Australian identity. Vision of a ceremony is another poem. It is the poem arises the question of Australian identity. Question of Australian identity because of the class of culture. Because of the class of culture. CLASH. Class of two classes of culture. CLASS. Class of culture. The poetry is full of the poetry is full of modernity of life with elegic tone, Elegic. Elegiac tone means lamentation, bilapo, elegiac tone, just like elegy written in a country churchyard of elegiac tone, suffering tone. This is full of metaphysical vein, metaphysical veins, VEIN. Metaphysical means physical beyond existence, beyond existence of physical. That is
Sir,
called
this is
metaphysical.
metaphysical.
It is metaphysical veins, veins, veins. You stop it, understand it. What is metaphysical? Metaphysical means something beyond existence. The existence of God you cannot imagine. That is metaphysical. Is it not? Only you can feel. You cannot have any visible sight. And you can imagine, you can think, you can feel, you can bring the emotion, but you cannot see the real existence, real physical existence. That is metaphysical. Means the origin of a God, the benevolence of God, the existence of God, the God's mercy, all these are metaphysical. Then you write Terra Australia. Terra Australia is another poem. Terra, Terra, Australia. Australia. Terra Australia. Terra Australia is a beautiful masterpiece that that represent represents alienation and anxiety of both the Australian natives and the white settlers and the white settlers, both the colonizer and colonized. This is all about anxiety and also that is alienation. Alienation means aloneness, aloneness. Then you come to another point. Eddie Hope, Eddie Hope, 1907, 1907 to 2000, 2000.
Sir, please repeat that line again, please.
Eddie Hope, 1907 to 2000. The duration of his birth and death, 1907 to 000. Eddie Hope was born in Coma, Coma, comma, comma, New South Wales, New Wales, South Wales, Walls, South Wales, who studied language and literature in Sydney and Oxford University, who studied language and literature in Sydney and Oxford University and taught taught in Melbourne University and taught in Melbourne University. Stop. The Wandering Island
Excuse-
is one point.
Sir,
Hello,
yes, sir. Eddie Hope actually studied in Sydney University, Sydney and
Sydney and
Oxford.
Oxford
Okay.
University.
Where he actually worked at which university, sir?
He studied in Sydney and Oxford University and taught
Ta-
in
and taught
Melbourne
in
University.
Melbourne University. Okay.
University. He is a teacher of Melbourne University, but he is a student in Oxford and also Sydney. Can you understand me? Okay.
Yes, sir.
The Wandering Island, a hate speaking, comma. These are the poems I am citing. A Wandering Island, a hate speaking, drafting continents, and Orpheus, Orpheus, Orpheus are his beautiful masterpieces, are his beautiful masterpieces, are his beautiful masterpieces. The Wandering Island, Head Speaking, Drafting Continents, Orpheus are his beautiful masterpieces. They express these poems, they express human experience, human experience and commentaries to the modern Australian life. Commentary to the modern Australian life. Stop it. You listen to me. All these poems reflect the different types of commentaries of the poet. How the Australian people, modern people, traditional people, middle people, contemporary people, they go on taking their life, how they are, whether they are happy or unhappy, what is the identity of them, all these things, the commentary, the political, economic situation, the political turmoils of Australia, and the also cultural crisis of and economic crisis, all these, how the society was going on, all these commentaries were given by this poet. Okay, then come to women writers of Australia, women poets. Rosemary Dobson, Rosemary Dobson, this poetry, Rosemary Dobson, Dobson, Dobson is a nice women poet of Australia. Is a nice women poet of Australia. Her poetry reflects, her poetry reflects the feministic voice, the feministic voice, feministic voice, as well as the greatness of art in the life, the greatness of art in the life, which immortalize, which immortalize the fleeting moments of a present, the fleeting moments of the present. Stop it. The fleeting moments
Sir,
of the present.
sir, which moment?
Immortalize the fleeting moments of a present, present
Fleeting moment. Sir, spelling. Can you please
fleeting,
spell that?
fleeting, FLEETING. Fleeting means
Okay, okay.
very quickly, quickly passing out.
Okay,
Fleeting
sir.
moment. You listen to me that these poems of Rosemary represents a women's voice, that is feministic attitude, and the immortality of art. Art, art means either writing or craftsmanship or any art of life that immortalizes the human being in the society. These are the contexts of this women's Rosemary Dawson. And also then come to what is aboriginal voice? Aboriginal voice. Another headline, you write it. That is caption. Aboriginal voice. Aboriginal voice. Aboriginal voice. The rich Aboriginal culture. This is the last. Write it. This is Aboriginal culture or indigenous culture. aboriginal or indigenous or born native. These three words are same. Was rich in oral tradition. Was rich in oral tradition. Stop. This was noted. This was noted. Noted for its own originality, and it was not translated into any written form till early 20th century. The aboriginal or native or indigenous culture was rich, but it was not translated into English till till 20th century. This was in traditional and oral tradition. Then you write. Then gradually it became. Then gradually it became audible to speaking English speaking audience. It became audible to English speaking audience from 1960. From 1960. Stop.
Sir, can you please repeat that line? Then gradually it become.
It became audible to speaking English speaking audience from 1960. From 1960. Stop. The Aboriginal literature or was native literature of Australia was forced by the white settlers forced by the white settlers to take into colonized form. The white Australian look down upon look down upon the original natives original natives in a hateful manner, very insignificant or bad people. Then last writer you write Katha Walker. This is the last Katha Katha Walker Walker 1920 existing Australian poet. Katha Walker 1920 birth. Perhaps she might be dead, but we do not have any mention in the our kids. Katha Walker belongs to Aboriginal birth. Stop. The civilization forced her to be influenced by colonial thrust. Colonial thrust. Colonial thrust. THURS. Stop. She says in one of her poems, in one of her poems, Just colon mark and quote it. Colon mark, colon, just like the teeth of a snake. Colon mark. I am international. Her words. I am international, comma, never mind place. One line. I am international, never mind place. I am for humanity. Second line. I am for humanity, all one race. All one race. My dear students, you see these two lines I am scanning. I am I one word, one syllable, am international. I am international, never mind place. I am for humanity, comma, all one race. Place and race, this rhyme. Rhyme. These two lines are rhyme together, just like a. Just like I am citing one example, in Odia literature, you can understand. Asante Varsa Kala Nidagha Sese, Gotoi Meghomala Akaso Dese, Samokoi Bijuli Meghode Hore, Kampai Vajranado Mohika Tore. This is the rhyming scheme. So this is the poetic key structure. I am international, never mind please. I am for humanity, all one race. This is the rhyming scheme. Very beautiful rhyme. Then write it. She feels that the world as her family, the world as her family, without any discrimination of caste, creed, and culture. Caste, creed, and culture. Stuff. Her poem, We Are Going. Her poem, We Are Going in a single inverted comma, expresses agony means suffering, agony of disposition, agony of disposition, stuff. It discusses the sorrows and sufferings, it discusses the sorrows and sufferings of aboriginal people or native people.
Sir, it
The
discusses the
poem
sorrows and suffering of native people.
native people, native Australian, those aboriginal, native people. Sometimes there is lamentation, sometimes there is lamentation in elegiac note, in elegiac, Elegic. This is adjective. Elegiac note, a note. Elegiac means lamentation, means suffering. Bilapo, bilapo. Just like I am citing one example of Odia, that is, Koili moro Mathura Kugala, Kahabole Gala Putra, Bahuri Noilalo, Koili. This is an address poem in Odia literature. You cannot understand also. You see, elegiac note means the lamentation, bilapo. And this is lamentation of the culture. Stop writing here. Everything is okay. Note is over. Then we will come to the question and its answer. Some textual discussion, it will be over. But a period is not sufficient so far, I think. Write it. I have to complete. Question on modern Australian poetry. Selected questions I have given. Try to get ready. Selected questions. Selected questions. Only 5 to 6 questions I am giving, and you can write by reshuffling my note and reading once again. You can get it answer. Right. Number one question: give a brief description of a structure and theme of a modern Australian poetry. Give a brief description of the structure and theme of modern Australian poetry. Give a brief description of structure and the theme of modern Australian poetry. Or question. This is a single question. Or question. Or what do you know about modern Australian poetry? The same answer. What do you know about the modern Australian poetry? I would give the tips about that. Number three. Number two. What do you know the relationship between man and nature? It is very important question. What do you know the relationship between man and nature in Australian modern poetry? In Australian modern poetry, you will cite example the natural poets like Wordsworth, Shelley, Byron, Keats, those who have been influenced the Australian poets. They are influenced by the romantic poets. They discuss the landscape, the people, the humanity, the search for identity. All these are the ingredients of the answer. So, what do you know the relationship between man and the nature in modern Australian poetry? Number three, right? Three, how modern Australian poetry is how modern Australian poetry is influenced by Australian influenced by English and American poetry. English and American poetry. Or same question, how modern Australian poets are influenced by the English and American poets. The same question, is it not? Poets or poetry? Whatever you like. Number four, critically appreciate Judith Wright's poetry. This is a very important question. Critically appreciate Judith Wright's theme and technique of her poetry. Theme and technique of her poetry. Judith Wright's theme and technique of her poetry. Fifth question is last. Right? Give a critique. CRITIQE. Give a critique. 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 The following poet poems. The following poems. Following poems. Single poem. I am citing example. Single poem. You write A, B, C, D, like all that. You make the different fractions. South country. A, B. Orange tree. C. Night or beat. D. Australia. 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 E. Australian dream. Australian dream. F. We are going. G. The southern call. SOUTH. Southern call. All these are poems. All these are Australian modern poems. Singly, the question may come, critically appreciate South country, critically appreciate orange tree, give a critique of a night orbit, give a criticism, what do you know about Australia, what are the points of Australian dreams, how you are going, and Southwell. All these are single poems of a different Australian poet.
Sir, can
So
you please
the
repeat the
note is,
options again? Sir, first
hello,
one is South country. Yes, sir. Sir, can you please repeat the options again?
option,
Ha, sir. Yes,
or
the
you
poem names. Names of the poem.
suppose you
Yes.
listen to me that I am now asking and answering all these questions, how you can write. At first, suppose number one question is give a brief description of a structure and a theme of Australian poetry, modern poetry, Australian modern poetry. At first, you approach very significantly and dramatically to your answer. That just I am giving a technique how to answer all the questions. Even if a general question is very easy to answer, but a particular question you must have to textually thorough. Otherwise, you cannot answer the question. So my point is that the first question, brief is the characteristic structure of the theme and also the technique of the Australian modern poetry. At first, you write the term modern poetry. The term modern poetry carries two words, very important: modern plus poetry. Modern is the break of tradition. Poetry may be different types of definitions, like poetry is criticism of life in nature. Then this is the modern poetry. Then we shall tell about the definition of the poetry is very much significant one. It is very significant depending upon the different cultures. English poetry must have English tradition. Australian poetry must have Australian tradition. That is also Indian poetry must have Indian climatic tradition. All these, the formation, technique, setting, subject matter, thematic structure of almost all the poetry depends on the poet's attitude and the birth she or he takes it, or the people and the landscape that we or she begets himself or takes his birth. So Australian modern poetry is a salad bowl because just after massive migration, the system of Australian culture was a radically changed only because the migrant from different lands, from the Britain, from America, and all sorts of countries, they started flowing over. That was massive migration. As a result of that, the entire culture of Australia was radically changed because there was a class. Suppose I am going to your home, I have some culture and you have your culture, and these culture clash together whenever I confront in your family. Either I can adjust or I cannot adjust. Either I can uh, display my hegemony, my supremacy to you, or you can also subordinate myself. In this way there is a cultural clash of yours and mine. The same thing happens to the society of Australia. The white settlers, they started. The white settlers means they come from different country, and then you will cite different examples that South Country, Orange Tree, Nighting Orbit, Australia, Australian Dream, all these poems caring about Judith Well and Marine, other poems, poets, they started writing their poetry with amalgamation of the culture. Either some appreciate the Australian traditional culture or some dissuade the culture. In this way, the poetry was reshuffled. That was into a great background of the culture. This is the type of answer you can do. Number one. Number two is what do you know the relationship between man and nature? This may be these two questions it may come in your examination point of view, whatever I write, that relationship of a man and nature is perennial, is ancient. It is not the modern. The relationship of a man and nature is perennial, means that has been also running and it will also run for future. So that is the relationship of a man and nature. It is the every ingredient of every poetry. So Australian culture is based upon its landscape, and two cultures like two cities, Sydney and Melbourne, they started also influencing. Two world wars started also influencing Australian life and economic life, cultural crisis, economic crisis, political crisis. All these are reflected in the poetry of Judith Wright, Judith Wright, and also other poems like Brennan and other poets that I have already given. I am asking about different types of poets that Christopher Brennan, John Shaw Nelson, Kenneth Treasurer, R.D. Fitzgerald, Judith Wright, David Campbell, and Rosemary Dawson, M.L.A., and all these two to three significant poets, uh, important matters, you must take it and note it down. This is all about the question two. Question three. Modern Australian poetry is influenced by English and American poetry in structure and theme. Do you consider it right? The statement is right. Yes, the statement is right to 100% because the poetry is the criticism of life. So each and every act must be. So literature is supposed to be the mirror of the life. Every and each act is reflected by another act. This is the imitation, the poetic theory. This is the poetic of that Aristotle. Aristotle speaks in his encyclopedia that art is the imitation of another act. Suppose you follow my tradition, I follow your tradition. This is an imitation. Imitation of imitation is the formation of the act. So English style, American style of the poetry, theme and technique, almost all are influenced by that native Australian or immigrants or white settlers. They were strongly affected by the impact of all these people. Their poetry, like Wordsworth's poetry, Romanticism, Shelley Byron Keats, and the symbolic statement of that Baudelaire and Malaram, they are French and German poets, and they have influenced them almost. The poetry of modern Australia is almost a salad bowl, means a multicultural. Multicultural. Some appreciate the native culture, some deprecate the native culture. Some highly appreciate, some highly deprecate. Some accept it, some unaccepted it. In this way, there was a long-standing fight of the traditional and the modern. This is the entire nutshell of Australian poetry. My dear student, give your comments about that. We will go to the text to discuss it. Is it not? Ask any comments of you. You tell how whether I am audible or visible or anything else. You ask any question. Ask.
Uh, Sir, you are audible and visible both. Sir, I want to ask you a previous question in June 2022. Can I ask?
Yes, ask on one question of this
Yes.
modern Australian poet.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, here is a question that Campbell's poetry deals with many significant contemporary issues. Exemplify. Sir, in this question, how I will write the answer?
You ask me the question, I will write it. I will note
Yes,
down
sir.
it and then I will discuss.
Yes, sir.
Ask question.
Campbell's, yes, Campbell's poetry.
Can Campbell.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Campbell's poetry
Huh.
deals with
Poetry deals
many significant
with many significant,
contemporary issues.
yes, significant of contemporary
Issues.
contemporary issues. This is a masterpiece question and very important. I will discuss it. Let me. Campbell's poem I am bringing to you to the site. Campbell. Yes, let me
Yes.
see.
Here it is saying that
Campbell.
exemplify. That means we have to elaborate David Campbell's poetry. How
Yes,
this poetry is affected to Australian
David.
modern.
You. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Australian Dream is a masterpiece poem. Australian Dream of David Campbell. Write it. You can write the answer. Australian Dream.
Yes.
Australian Dream is a beautiful masterpiece of David Campbell that represents significant significant contemporary issues. You go positively. What are let you write it? What are the significant contemporary issues? Contemporary issues are maybe a class of culture, appreciation of nativity, depreciation of nativity, deprecation of nativity, acceptance of aboriginal, unacceptance of natural, the clash of culture, the economic crisis, the political turmoil, the social disorder, or cultural clashes are the contemporary issues of Australian poetry in general and Campbell's poem in particular. Campbell's poem in particular. The poem Australian Dream, just I am citing one example to stop a little. Also discussing the text, the doorbell buzzed. It was past 3 o'clock. The steeple St. Andrew Rathruck guided silently to darkness. My head was bronze clear. I rolled from bed, the reacher from the furniture. Light, light blinded the hair, blinded the hair. The headstand sprang upright. I fumbled with luck and the poach. I stood royal family with the wavering touch. Means Campbell's Australian dream gives this first stanza I am discussing that one horrible night that Campbell itself was in a dark sleep, in a dense sleep, dark sleep. All of a sudden the bell rang. He was hurried, worried, disposed of. From the bed, he rolled down from the bed just like a ball and wanted to wanted to uh, unkey the door, but it was absolutely dark. How can he unlock the door and a torch like that? Where is my torch? Where is my light? How can open the door? This is the first Allah. How does it give the contemporary? So the identity of any person in the land of Australia is in darkness because all of a sudden there is the economic bell, there is the political turmoil, there is the issue of political issue, means government assigns some notice, there is something else, the cultural issue, just like our cultural issue means vote banking, this and that, all these are ringing. That was just like a bell. Means an Australian identity was in darkness, all of a sudden bell ring or any sorts of symbols that is coming outside, and ultimately the poet himself in darkness and he cannot unlock the door. This is in this way Campbell's poetry is significant, giving different issues, the culture, cultural class, the economic turmoil, the search for identity, the traditional life, whether it is good, whether we will accept or appreciate or deprecate it, in this way, Campbell's poetry is full of images. Then last line I can give. You see, I voted for ladies to undress a sense of fitness and greatness. Is always. I hope Majesty sleep well. I lied. Hand touched mine, and the queen said, I am most grateful to you, Jack. Please call me ma'am. So all of a sudden, a woman, when he unlocked the door, touched his hand. It tells that I am with you. Why are you so hopeless? Means inside our inspirational insight of mind of every identity, every individual must have a patient. Suppose you are hopeless, and there is another patient. If a door is closed, another door is open for you, each and every individual. You can keep faith that if you are at a loss, you should have some sort of a breath that the second coming is yet in my hand. Means another man is with me that I can fulfill. Why shall I commit suicide? Because out of frustration, my life is there, it is long. Suicide is not end of life, it is beginning of suffering. It is beginning of suffering. Soul is tormented and tortured. So a man commits suicide only to end her sorrows and suffering or his suffering. But that is not. That is beginning of the suffering. I am telling a beautiful story to you about myth of Sisyphus that you like. Once upon a time, it is from Greek myth. Once upon a time, Sisyphus was a Greek god, and he was given in charge of the goddess Virgin. Means the virgins of a different goddess Indra, Sisupal, like this and that. He was in charge to even if he acting just like a security of the goddess Virgin in the honeyed middle of the light. That Sisyphus was newly married, and he stealthily, secretly went to meet his wife. As a result of one virgin god was kidnapped by another one. So Supreme God Zeus came, started cursing, "You nonsense Sisyphus, that you have already discharged the lake of duty. You went in to meet your wife in the honeyed middle of the night, and you are discharged from your service, and you are given the punishment to lift a rolling stone under your belly to the top of the mountain." So Sisyphus is going to some extent and coming down, going, coming down. In this way, the face of Sisyphus is no better than the stone itself. This is the every and each identity of the modern people, that we are sure of our death. In spite of our death, still we crumble. I am 72 years old. Still I am teaching. Teaching such may not be teaching sake for craze of the money, for craze of the knowledge, and these are the wishes of each and every individual. This is about myth of Sisyphus. My dear students, this is the end of the class. Next class is about Voss, that that is the Patrick, why she the Nobel Prize winner, that Australian novel Voss will be taught. I think how far I am audible, visible, and also appreciated by you. Please give me the final comment of me. Give.
Thank
Hello.
you so much, sir, for explaining that very important question. Actually, from poem, I was like very lack of knowledge due to my background. Actually, I'm a technical student, so I don't
You
know
must
about.
quote.
Yes,
You
sir.
must post some lines, text of the poem. If you are
Yes,
thorough
sir.
about the text, you must
Yes,
go each and every individual poem. It is difficult in 2 hours. I must have to confine. Is it not?
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
One that poem, but you must get ready for general questions. That is, may
Yes,
not be
sir.
mark fetching, but you will never fail. But each
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now,
individual that is select. Okay, thank you,
yes, sir.
my dear.
Yes, sir. And now,
Thank
actually, I
you.
got to know that how to explain this thing in my own
And in
language. Yes, sir.
you you can in your own language, as far as practicably you have to answer the questions. It will credit more to the person
Yes,
who is very much identical, not identical to other. You will try your best in your own language to write it. That would be
yes,
sufficient,
sir. Yes, sir.
and it will
Definitely.
carry.
Thank you so much,
Thank
sir, for this
you.
guidance. Thank
Um,
you.
okay, tomorrow we will be meeting. If I will leave or if I will be dead in night, there will be no more to see you. Is it not, my dear? I may be able to see or not. It depends on God. I am
No,
in
no,
darkness
sir.
just like an Australian. Okay. Thank you. Best of the luck. And tomorrow we will be meeting.
Yes, sir. Thank you so
Hello.
much, sir. Good night, sir.
Goodbye.